Okay, so hello everyone, once again. My name is Milos and I'm coming from Bosnia, and here are my colleagues, Felicia from Brazil and Muskan from Pakistan. And we would like to present you a little bit more about Mr. Payre's book and this whole idea of path to putting people first. And to begin with, I would like to start with, we have technical issues. I would like to start and to explain what we're going to be speaking about. I would like to present a little bit more about the book itself, and further Muskan will explain a little bit more about development and globalization, and especially how free trade is done in Global South. And we will also come with some proposal that this book argues, and Felicia will cover this point. Later we have some questions that we will promote some debate with them. And yeah, I would like to start this presentation with one significant question. This question actually wants to ask, how do we actually create a global economy that fosters progress, fairness, and sustainability? Why I'm asking this question? It's because the book, or at least what we were able to discover through this short summary, is actually arguing and is trying to understand how this trade system in the world works. And this book actually critiques this unbalanced free trade, and we are trying to understand whether this unbalanced free trade is achieving the previously mentioned goals. And we're trying to address that. I mean, in the book it is addressed that it actually leads to major inequality. It leads to a lot of other issues, and especially concerning environment and how it harms environment and so on. To continue more, some of the main critiques of this book revolves around how actually the big corporations are trying to exploit cheap labor, and also work in those, try to work in those lax environment standard regions, and how it affects developing countries. Another critical point is that this does not undermine workers' rights, but it's also concerning this race to the bottom that harms also industries and environment in general. Another important topic here that we have to address is how free trade, as currently practiced, prioritizes profits over everything. Like it definitely prioritizes profits over people, which is one of the interesting points that we have to discuss more about. And to address all these challenges, the book actually proposes some solutions, like imposing different kind of tariffs, especially around these labor and environmental standards. And yeah, in that way, it tends to improve, somewhat improve sustainability and fairness, global fairness. We can move on, and here I would like to present some interesting examples that we found in a book. The one revolves around battery industry that you have been speaking before about. It is very interesting topic because when we take into account cobalt mining, for example, as you previously mentioned, in Democratic Republic of Congo, or if we also consider, for example, lithium mining in Chile, and some other examples where in some other countries, mainly from Global South, where we have a vast majority of resources that big manufacturers are using, and especially China in this case, which produces 60% of global electric batteries. We have to say that in these regions there's a lot of not good conditions, unsafe conditions. There's a lot of child labor that you previously mentioned, and this is something that we have to speak about when we are analyzing this free trade. And another key issue here is how actually West is strategically relying on China, especially since 1999, and from the time when U.S. started to collaborate more with China, and especially we have to mention these key industries, and for example Huawei's influence, and how major governments of U.S. are, especially from the Trump's time, are trying to claim Huawei as key issue in why U.S. is doing less good and why China is doing good, and how trying to convince the allies to stop in a way collaborating with them, and so on. Moving forward, I would like to speak a little bit more about social and political consequences in the West. And we have to say, you previously mentioned these public riots and all these ideas, how automation and offshoring led to loss of 2.4 million jobs, especially in manufacturing from 1999 and from the time when all this collaboration started. And what we have to ask ourselves here, and what we are actually suggesting, is that we have to ask ourselves whether China is the real reason, how we understood from the book that it is, and we want to understand whether it is actually the real reason, and whether there is something else behind everything that. And here are some proposals, like in the book, there are some proposals how to fix this global trade, and as I previously mentioned, these different kind of tariffs that will gain further some revenues that can be split between improving those developing countries and also support some impacted regions in the West. And I would like to also produce some philosophical context and some ideas, especially how Karl Marx idea of labor under capitalism actually is in the same way aligned with the critique of the book, how companies are striving for profits over people, and also Marx saying view on trade and how it should actually enhance humans' freedoms, which is again one of the critiques that that book tries to emphasize. And some other side, some challenges that here are opposed, like this whole critique is actually does not accept idea from Paul Krugman who claims that trade imbalances are some sort of inevitable adjustments that come from comparative advantage. And this critique of this book also questions whether low cost labor is actually a valid comparative advantage. Furthermore, I would like to pose another question, but first I would like to explain that this book presents sort of the critique of this free trade, but also provides some kind of solutions which tend to promote this inclusive economic growth. But in the end, I would like to ask and pose another question. I mean, we would like to ask and pose this question: are we actually willing to demand for fairer trading system, and if it means higher costs for some goods?
Right. So moving towards the criticism now. So while I agree with Payre on the failures of free trade, I think we diverge in opinions on a more ideological basis, primarily the understanding of development in Global South, globalization, and how it impacts the Global South. So why this is important for us to understand is because the premise of the book relies on the comparative advantage of the Global South and the idea that developing countries need to catch up with and follow the path of today's advanced capitalist nations. And why I call this a misconception is generally development theory relies on the historical experiences of the global north, and in a way that the present of the south is compared to the past of the north. And here it's important to draw this distinction between underdevelopment and undevelopment. So underdevelopment refers to the use of resources which benefits a stronger core rather than the country where it is extracted from, and undevelopment refers to the non-use of resources. So according to Frank, today's advanced nations were never really underdeveloped. In a similar line of argument, we have the narrative of post-colonial innocence. So where development theory sees the development of the global south in isolation, without the historical context, without the role of this global economic system. And furthermore, so the advanced nations of today, especially US and UK, used to be some of the most protectionist states, right? They had very high tariffs, industrial tariffs, state investment, state-owned enterprises, and the institutions that we consider to be the global standards were acquired only after development and growth. They did not just exist. On the flip side, in terms of global south, we have some of these arguments which are used as justification of the inefficiencies of institutions. So we have culture, but if we take a closer look at this, negative behavioral attitudes like laziness and theft are often the outcome of poor economic conditions, not the cause. And Chang actually in his book refers to how we had these stereotypes that the Germans were known to be thieves while the Japanese were known to be lazy. It's very hard to understand these stereotypes today, but this shows the evolution of how culture evolves with economic growth. A similar argument applies to corruption, reverse causality, and also all of these corrupt and inefficient institutions are also a colonial legacy in many cases. So, in an essence, a purely Western-centric perspective does not and cannot explain the development in Global South. But at the same time, we cannot explain it without the role that the Global North plays. Moving towards free trade, so Mr. Payre agrees that free trade is bad. But here we're going to kind of argue on whether the South actually has a comparative advantage. So world system theory, dependency theories, it argues about these core and periphery relationships that we have. And in terms of unequal exchange theory, these core powerful countries leverage their geopolitical dominance in the world economy to depress the prices of labor in the global south. This leads to a hidden transfer of value and net expropriation. So these price differentials effectively act as a method of maintaining these same patterns of appropriation. And kind of to quantify this, we have this footprint analysis of the South's embodied resource exports and imports. So the darker bars represent the exports of South, and the lighter bars represent the imports. In terms of raw material equivalence, for every unit that the South imports, it has to export 5 units to compensate for it. A similar ratio in terms of embodied land, a ratio of 3 to 1 for embodied energy, and 13 to 1 for embodied labor. Further valorization in northern prices leads to a net drain of $242 trillion in a space of just 25 years, from 1990 to 2015, which also corresponds to 24% of the North's GDP. Now this is this quote from Mr. Payre which says that lowering trade barriers and displacing low-skilled industries, especially apparel, to developing countries provided jobs to millions of people, especially women. On this note, I would like you to meet Shima Akhtar. Shima Akhtar is a 23-year-old garment worker in Dhaka, Bangladesh. She started a labor union in her factory, and when they presented their demands to the management, some 20 to 30 staff members locked them up in a factory and beat them up. This is just one of the few faces of the 4 million garment workers in Bangladesh, 85% of whom are women, and they are paid less than $3 a day. And the counter-argument will be here that Bangladesh needs to upgrade its social and labor standards. But it's also important to understand that garment industry is kind of the backbone of the Bangladeshi economy. Increasing these social and labor standards would entail cost increases, which would translate to loss of clients, and this perpetuates the global south's race to the bottom. And I just would end with a question: does the provision of jobs justify the oppression of the working class that is perpetuated by the global north?
Okay, so right now I'm going to talk a little bit about the compensation for social and labor gaps, that what is addressed and is like the solution proposed in the book. So just to understand a little bit, like the objective, the general idea is like basically fix the current trade system so that free trade can stop being unbalanced, unethical, and ultimately irresponsible and unsustainable. Make social, labor, and environmental standards an integral part of all major trade agreements. And there's another quote for the book: assuredly, healthy nations have an ethical and moral responsibility towards less developed countries, yet it is also strategically astute to help them succeed. Developed nations would curb massive economic immigration, thus civil unrest at Rome, by helping developing nations create and sustain productivity and resources at home. So this is the object. It seems really nice. Let's talk a little bit about the proposal. So basically it's a tax idea. So it's a mechanism applied to imports coming to developed countries. We don't have a lot of details, but basically 50% of the money collected would go to help fund improvement of social programs and institutions in developing countries with the help of NGOs and other organizations. And the rest would go funding regions impacted by globalization in developed countries. So be vocational training programs, educational hubs, and a third-party institution or organization will control the destination of these funds to minimize ineffective uses. And for the 47 less developing countries listed by the UN, the entirety of the money collected will be invested in them. So he also says that this program should be overseen and run by a legitimate organization. For example, an alliance between the World Trade Organization and the ILO with audit rights over their exporting countries and corporations. So just to explain a little bit more, he makes this differentiation between standard industry and strategic industries, being the strategic industry, the energy system, telecommunication, electronics, transportation, software, AI, machine tools, yeah, just to have this. And basically how it would work would be to standard industry, that this value wouldn't be more than 10%. So it would be split and would be evaluated on if these companies are following the ILO labor standards. But for the strategic industry, the compensation would not be capped. And how would this work? If the final price of Chinese cars in the US would be if they were manufactured in the US. So he's basically saying that in China, the labor hour is $8, but if in the US it's 45 to 55, the final price would be the same. So yeah, you guys understand. And another possible calculation would be to take into account differences in social spending. So if China is 7% and he says that in the US it's 29, so it's another way of calculating it. So here are some critiques. Basically, well, as Muskan explained to us, we have this historical exploitation and its dependency. So these mechanisms could really risk reinforcing exploitative relationships, since global south countries have historically been reduced to providers of raw materials and cheap labor for the benefits of wealthy nations. This classification of industries as standard and strategic could perpetuate this imbalanced relation. The second is a superficial fix. It's not designed to address systemic inequalities. It preserves the disconnection between those who produce the wealth and those who have access to the value generated. The mechanism might shift the focus away from directly advocating for workers' rights. Third is the disempowerment. So this reliance on third parties to allocate funds reflects a top-down approach, potentially leaving to decision-making to external actors with different priorities, which undermines the local workers' autonomy in determining the allocation of resources that they generate. And basically, there's also a possible fallback effect. So increased taxes could reduce the competitiveness of these goods from global south countries, causing trade volumes to drop and forcing firms to diminish production, leading to potential layoffs, wage reductions for already vulnerable workers, creating a downward spiral both in economic and social outcomes. So we have some questions to fuel the discussion. Oh my God, sorry. So basically, we want to understand how to create a more participatory mechanism focused on promoting trade while empowering workers by ensuring they have a direct role in decision-making and control over the funds they generate. What frameworks could be introduced to address the systemic causes of inequality in trade, focusing on creating long-term sustainable development rather than temporary fixes that could reinforce dependency and power imbalance? And how should such a framework take into account ecological debt that is owned by the global north to the south? Thank you.
And you can pick whatever you can say, and then we'll open the floor.
Yeah, sure.
Many thanks. I mean, I've been dreaming of having that kind of conversation, you know, about these ideas and how to implement them or not, how to improve them, especially from people from the global south. Because yes, I mean, there's going to be a direct impact, but I believe a very positive impact. I mean, that's what I see myself. I don't disagree with a lot of criticisms that have been made. Obviously, we have a responsibility in the North. I mean, yes, we're a former colonial empire, especially this country, as you very well know. It's not the only one. England, as you very well say, especially in your country, has a big presence and has a deep debt, obviously. I mean, no question about that. Hence, actually, my proposals. I mean, I think we owe the South indeed a lot. I mean, you're alluding also to the, to the ecological debt. That's obviously a big issue. I mean, if CO2 level are so high and if the planet is so impacted, it's because we built our wealth on huge CO2 emissions. So I don't disagree with all that. And it's already in the public debate. I mean, there are already, as you know, funds which are being allocated to try and help developing countries deal with their migration to a more to a less CO2 emitting kind of grid and economy in general. So this is already debated, but we can definitely do a lot more. I mean, no question about that. We should be doing a lot more. I mean, there's no question about that. On the first question, a more participatory mechanism focus on promoting trade while empowering workers by ensuring they have a direct role in decision-making and control over the funds generated. It's a key question. I mean, one of the questions I had also in debating this with other people who know these topics is, should we give that money back to the governments of these countries who don't want necessarily social standards and environmental standards to improve on top of that? I mean, there's a big question also. I mean, you know, do we want these people to be in charge of distributing that money? I mean, in fact, we believe, plus obviously the risk of this money being stolen, obviously, in a number of countries, unfortunately, corruption and so forth. And so the way we saw it was more to encourage NGOs and actually give that money to local NGOs. You know, there are quite a few local NGOs in all of your countries who are doing a very effective job. In fact, one of my best friends is leading an NGO called Better with Water, who is building distribution of water systems to distribute water in slums, actually in Bangladesh and in the Philippines. I mean, these people, I mean, they're doing an extremely effective job, you know, replacing people who are carrying water to these slums with often mafias running that. I mean, it's a disaster. Water costs a fortune. I mean, helping, you know, NGOs like that, you know, is obviously key. There are also quite a few NGOs working on obviously all the healthcare issue. This is, by the way, related to healthcare because when you don't have water, you have babies dying, you know, in large quantities because you don't have a high level of sanitary, you know, of sanity in those slums. And so any NGO working on these topics, you know, related to, you know, primary basic social issues, I think should be helped. And the money should not necessarily go through local governments. I mean, no question about that. And ideally having local workers through a mechanism to be invented, be involved in making decisions on where to channel this money as a priority would be great. Obviously, it doesn't exist today. And again, most of these governments are not necessarily very much in favor of doing that and don't necessarily have the mechanism to organize those kinds of consultations. I mean, these governments, most of these governments, as you know, it's probably not the case in Brazil. Pakistan, I don't know well enough, but, you know, whether these countries have democratic processes in place to collect opinions, well, we can organize polls, we can always organize polls. We know how to organize polls, especially with the digital tools we have today. We could poll the Pakistani population and ask them, where do you want the money to be channeled, to be funneled? What's your priorities? And suggest a few options. That's possible. That's actually very possible. Even with a government that's not necessarily highly democratic, and willing to agree with this. So, and it would be the terms. The terms would be, we buy your T-shirts, we buy your products, we buy whatever you manufacture, if only you abide by these rules, if only you help us help you improve social standards in your country. That would be the deal. And so they wouldn't have the choice. If they want us to buy their products, they would have to agree with this. On the question of, creating inequalities and impacting the competitiveness of these countries, it's a very fair question. But hey, the idea would be that it would be a new WTO, It would apply to everybody. It's obviously very ambitious. It may take a few years, if not a few decades, to get there. But that's the vision, you would want to do business. In fact, I'm advocating, I didn't mention this because I didn't have enough time, but I have more time now. I'm advocating an alliance of Western democracies to agree on these rules. And it would be the US, it would be the European Union, it would be Japan, Australia, Singapore, New Zealand, 50% of the world economy agreeing to do business now on, as from now, on these terms only with developing countries. You want to do business with us? You want to sell us your products? You have to abide by these new rules. Even if you don't agree, Mr. President of whatever country, you have to agree. You have to let us help you improve your social standards. You have no choice. If you want us to buy your products, us, the global north, representing 50% of the world economy still today. So that's how we would deal with this objection on the loss of competitiveness. You would not lose competitiveness because if you want to deal with, obviously you could deal among yourselves and still not abide by these rules. But if you want to deal with us, these are the rules. In fact, I believe that we, the North, have abandoned our values, have surrendered our values. What makes us unique is these 150 years of battle to set high social standards and 50 years to set high environmental standards, and we've abandoned our core values. We don't make this an absolute, undisputable, non-negotiable set of rules. And now on, we decide to make this a core part of our value and to defend this strongly. If you want to do business with us, you have to abide by these rules because these are common universal values. If you don't want to abide by these universal values, you don't do business with us. And so that's how I see it. So we're dealing with your objection. No, you're not going to lose competitiveness because if you want to do business with us, anybody who wants to do business with us, you have to abide by that. Now on the... I don't think these are short-term fixes, by the way. I think the short-term fixes is what's going on today. It's just totally crazy. It's Trump and Biden deciding without any rationale to impose, tariffs on Chinese EVs, Europe is a bit more structured, as I said earlier, with the border tax and the carbon border tax, it's a bit more structured. But the US today, it's totally short-term fix. There's no rationale. But even Europe, again, the rationale is just on environmental topics. It's not on social topics. It's not in the debate. Believe it or not, we Europeans, we don't defend our 150 years of social history. It should be absolutely core. It should be in every single negotiation we have with any country, defending that. We have created probably the most sophisticated and protective environment for human beings in these countries. We respect people from cradle to grave. They have rights all the way from their birth to their death. They have access to all kinds of protections of all kinds. And that's key. That's very precious. We're not defending that. We're agreeing to do business with people who put people in labor camps. This is insane. And so the short-term fix are what's going on today, not what I'm suggesting. And that's why it's going to be difficult. It's going to take a few years. I may not see it, by the way. You may see it more than I see it. But it's probably your generation who should fight for that. I mean, more than me, or at least as much as me. And it may take, again, a few decades. I mean, this is very ambitious. I mean, this is a very, very ambitious vision. But I think it's the only way out. The only way out. And give a hand to developing countries, even if tyrants disagree. If tyrants want to do business with us, they will have to agree with this. And they will have to let their people, they will have to let us fund NGOs all over the country to help people improve their daily life. That's the deal. Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
So we will take two or three questions first. Okay.
Hi, my name is Nikhil Rampal. I'm from India, from the Global South. I really admire the passion that you came up with for labor rights. I really admire something coming from this part of the world. But my question to you is, where was this passion when all the business class of the Western developed world was benefiting from the exploitation that was happening in the developing countries? I mean, you're asking that China, India, and other countries in the global south are exploiting their labor and workers. Who let them into this position in the first place? One. Second, you talked about subsidies that benefited Chinese manufacturers beyond the limits. So why didn't the European businessmen protest in the WTO meetings? One. And if you wanted that, then why didn't you ask the ECB or the European governments to provide you a level playing field the way China did, or ban imports from China that were heavily subsidized, like to put a fair competition to that? Because why would the businessmen let their profits go even if it takes a child to produce those soft toys? That's my understanding, but I would love to understand from you where this passion existed.
Hello, I'm Thomas from Norway. I have a question about development in general, maybe. Because you're talking from a kind of global north perspective, I think, but most countries, most successful stories of development, and I know South Korea, or of industrial development, that is, in South Korea or China, for instance, has been in the export-led industrialization. But it seems like with your plan, that would be very difficult if we're going to have protectionism in the West. So how can because you need exports to generate foreign currency to finance the import of capital goods, etc. But how would that? So how could you foster development in your plan? Would they even be possible?
Question first. Oh, sorry, another one. Yeah, a question first on from India. I actually know India quite a bit. I've been there quite a few times. I love India. I went to Punjab. I know Punjab pretty well. Where is my passion coming from? Why is not everybody agreeing? I think mentalities are starting to change. Over here. I think we let this happen. Clearly, I mean. And we've surrendered our values. I mean, no question about that. I mean, we've abandoned. Our core values of respecting human being and nature by allowing this to happen, and why did it happen? There's an interesting speech I'm recommending to you from Mike Pompeo. Mike Pompeo was the second Secretary of State of Trump in his administration, the first mandate. He delivered a speech at the Nixon Library in California back in 2021, which is available on YouTube. You're going to find it easily. And he said, it was interesting because it was the end of his mandate, so he was pretty candid and transparent in his reaction. And he said, talking about China, we've created a Frankenstein. That's the word he used. We created a Frankenstein. And we did it out of naivety and greed. We did it out of naivety and greed. I think that's the best answer. That's what happened. So should we be forgiven? Yeah, we should think about the next step, you know. Yes, we've made a mistake, no question. But now we should behave differently. And not just in an irrational way, but just putting tariffs, you know, on anything without any rationale, or just forbidding trade, because another solution, and back to your question, I'm not forbidding trade, by the way. I'm not saying we should stop trading. In fact, this is a solution as well, which is actually happening today. I mean, I happen to know Valérie Pécresse a little bit, who's the president of the Greater Paris region, you know, Paris-Île-de-France, you know, la région Île-de-France. Recently, she told me that, and I'm not saying she was wrong. I mean, I think it was probably the only thing she had to do at that point, based on the tools she had. There was an RFP for suburban trains. And she was, you know, the regions in France, they're in charge of suburban trains. That's the main thing they do, you know. And so she was putting an RFP for suburban trains. And what she did, she said, you want to bid to my RFP? If you don't abide by a minimum set of ESG standards, you cannot bid. And it was actually a very brave political decision, because it meant not accepting Chinese manufacturers of suburban trains, which were the cheapest, but also those who had the lowest ESG standards. And so that's clearly an option, to just block trade. Say, we don't trade with these people anymore. And that's not necessarily the right thing to do. But in the case of Valérie Pécresse, she probably didn't have the choice. She wanted to prevent a situation where we would buy cheap Chinese trains, and she said, no way, their standards are not acceptable. So I'm not saying we should not trade. I'm saying we should keep on trading, but we should rebalance trade. Because yes, we don't want to prevent these countries from developing. In fact, you know, I'm a big fan of free trade. As I said earlier, free trade works very well, and is a source of wealth, an enormous source of wealth, when trade is balanced. And in fact, unbalanced free trade also created a lot of wealth also, let's face it. I mean, it has allowed a lot of countries, a lot of people to get out of poverty. I'm putting this in my book. I don't know if you read this, I mean, the statistics, but we had like 44% of people living below poverty standards back in 1980. We only have 9%. So, I mean, let's face it, even this very bad free trade system has been very good at creating prosperity in the global south. So I'm not saying we should stop trading. I'm just saying we should rebalance trade. And we should not prevent these countries from accessing a number of industries. I'm just saying that industries we deem strategic, and there are a few of them, which I suggested, obviously, this is open for debate. These industries, we should rebalance now, and we should rebalance completely. And only the other industries, non-strategic industries, then we should have just a minimal border tax tariff to use that to incentivize the global south to improve their standards and to converge as fast as possible. That's the vision.
Okay.
Thank you so much for a lovely talk. Although I do, my name is Ahmed. I'm from Pakistan. Although I do agree from an entrepreneurial perspective, the pain point, but I do have a question. What do you think about, in the current terms, the Western hypocrisy and Europe going like following the US? And I'm mentioning in context of Afghanistan, supposedly. So things happen, there are like trade barriers isolating Afghanistan. What happens, like you've given the Chinese entrepreneurs, Chinese firms create access, one of the biggest resources that has lithium, iron, copper, cobalt, and so on and so forth. So rather than just finding a proper solution, in certain cases, the solutions provided by the West are more or less radical, rather than being a very, to create a more solid solution. So, I mean, they've just started excavation, and this is going to be drastically impacting the EV world or sustainable energy paradigm in a more greater context. So I just wanted to understand, how do you see that?
Sorry, how do I see, maybe you can rephrase the question. How do I see what exactly?
For example, just I've given you an example of Afghanistan, how like Afghanistan. Yeah, isolation, paved the way for the Chinese firms to exploit the biggest resources, cobalt, iron. So rather than having a very incremental or a better solution, the radical approach, less market competition, you just given them a way to create a monopoly. So.
We take 2 or 3 questions.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm Khushi, I'm from India. And my question comes from more of a post-colonial point of view. You mentioned that, you mentioned help us help you, right? And I just wanted to come in through, let's say, the lens of Orientalism, as in that's a argument that we have also heard before, that they needed civilization, they needed to be civilized, and we know how that ended. So I was just wondering, like, how can we ensure that it's actually fair, and why do we think that the Orient is like not free of subject or like thought and action? Like, why does it need to be helped?
Third one.
Hi, I'm Charlie from the United Kingdom. So the focus of the start of your presentation was on China, yet the proposal suggests sending 50% of the tariffs back to the country which you imposed the tariffs on. How politically would you sell sending many billions of pounds, euros, dollars back to China?
Okay. 3 questions at once. So on Afghanistan, I've not given a lot of thought to this, but clearly if one day the West implements what I'm suggesting, we're going to be competing with China, who is obviously courting a lot of these countries. And China is courting these countries without demanding anything in return. I mean, China is telling all these autocrats, I mean, you can keep on being an autocrat and exploit your population and put them in jail when they disagree and so forth. Clearly, it's going to be tough. It's going to be a tough sell. But we're going to appeal to the people of these countries. And it's going to be tough, but we're going to appeal to the people of these countries. And we believe that because of our might, we're still the biggest player. I mean, if you take into account, again, all these countries, I talked about 50% of the world GDP, we're going to weight more than China, even if China grows. I don't think China will keep on growing, by the way, that quickly, because, I mean, China's management is hopeless right now. I mean, they're hopeless. I mean, Xi Jinping's hopeless. I mean, he's kind of a, I mean, they're like, you know, it's like in business, you know, companies that are too successful, at one point, their leaders are complacent, you know, they're just too proud of themselves, you know, and they're, you know, right now, I mean, the Chinese, I mean, they're going after their best entrepreneurs, their most talented innovators. I mean, they're going after them. I mean, they used to be extremely innovative, but now they're putting them in jail. I mean, they're like, I mean, the model, the Chinese model, I think, long-term doesn't work to have a sustainable, innovative economy. And I think that's what we're starting to see. I mean, they're struggling right now. They're not growing anymore. I mean, when you shoot your most innovative entrepreneurs, which is what they've done recently, they're not going to succeed ultimately. And so I think, yeah, there's going to be a Western bloc of democracies who can be messy at times, but democracy is messy by nature, has to be messy, because it's debate, it's disagreements being voiced, and this bloc is going to keep on being very successful and very wealthy, and is going to be able to impose its rule to a number of countries who do not want to. The people want, but the leaders may not. But if they want to do business with us, and they will want to do business with us, they will have no choice. On the question of why do you want to help us? It's a good question. It's a good question. We can be accused of neocolonialism, no question about that. I think the answer to this is the values I'm talking about. You know, respecting people, respecting nature, I think are universal values. I had the chance to travel pretty much around the world, everywhere I went, including in India, by the way. People were sharing this concern of respecting people and respecting nature in a very big way. I think I'm very much in line with Indian values, core values, actually even more than we do sometimes. I had discussion with Sikh monks in Punjab. I tell you, They're much more respecting the nature and people than I do myself and than I pretend to. And so I think these are universal values. But obviously you can decide that you don't want to be helped. It's absolutely your choice. Objection from the UK. Very good point. What I say in the book, and it was not in the summary, so I apologize for that. The book is there if you want to, if you read French, you can take away some of the books. What I'm saying is that if you don't respect fundamental human rights, you don't have access to this money. In the case of China, you're not going to have access to this money because you don't respect fundamental human rights. As long as you have Uyghur labor camps, for example, you're not going to have billions. You're going to have nothing. You have to start respecting fundamental human rights. And then we can start dealing, and then we can start doing business and sending money back to you.
Sylvain from France, but I have to speak English there. I have a question. First, there are several things that makes me react, but you said that poverty has decreased because of trade, but also it has decreased because CO2 went up. So there is a problem with this kind of development relying on energy, and so you said that the increasing CO2 emissions are mainly because of that. So I don't know if you want to continue this, but there's a problem with that, I think. And also, I think we don't have really great standard in environmental issues. I mean, there are pesticides in our agriculture, and we have high emission of CO2, so I don't know how you can say this. I think I really question this. Then you said that you decide to stop trade with those who don't want to apply our rules, but are we going to get minerals from Congo, for instance? I wonder, I think that nowadays our companies, they don't have real, they don't put moral in this, they don't care. So this, I'm saying, we should regulate ourselves first, maybe, before trying to regulate other people, maybe, I don't know. So that mainly my point. And it joins the other thing that you say compensation at the border. It means that you want to have the same price as a price that would be fair. The price you accept if the price is fair, but you don't care about the fact that it's not produced the right way. So for me, it's not really. It's a question. Okay, I got all this question. Sorry.
If you don't mind, don't forget to say where.
Yes. Okay, I'm Friederike from Germany. And you were talking about how we have this race to the bottom in terms of social standards that's like in a value chain that's mostly dominated by multinational companies too, who are then checking where the social standards are the lowest so they can do their production there for the cheapest. And I guess this is also happening with taxation. And I think you also have some experience with the multinational tax system. And so if you say we have this race to the bottom also in terms of taxation, then wouldn't you also agree with that we need a global minimum tax? Because we see, for example, in France, we have a very good social security system, same in Germany, but we also have high taxes in order to be able to finance this. And then wouldn't this also imply, in order to have good social security systems along the value chains, that we need a minimum tax in order for companies to be able to stop evading taxes along the value chain?
Lucien from France and England. A question along similar lines. The starting point is Muskan's presentation. So the main thing is that labor and environmental standards in the global north are dependent on and are only possible with growth and employment in the global north because they depend on the exploitation of labor and nature in the global south. So if we take that as a starting point, and then we take your logic of protectionism only on strategic sectors, and we think about it through the whole cycle of capital in the world, then wouldn't you be increasing wages all around the world ideally, but then you increase the cost of goods going to the global north, and therefore you increase the cost of living in the global north, or you reduce the profit margins of companies in the global north. And even if it's only on strategic sectors, as you were arguing, then you have to expect the retaliatory tariffs that we're seeing currently from the global south. And you also have to, remember that the south-to-south relations today are different than what they were in the 20th century, and the ability for global south countries to trade between one another, they are less reliant on the global north's market, basically, for growth and for trade. And also remembering that the global north is dependent on the material and the labor from the global south, etc. And they're very import reliant. Then wouldn't it mean that the only way for this to be sustainable worldwide is for inequality to decrease and for wealth to be redistributed, so that those increased living costs and those environmental and labor standards are only possible to be upheld without exploiting the global south. And the only way to do that is for there to be no more millionaires and for the rich 10% to pay their taxes and for all the money to be redistributed much more equally, so that those the increased living costs we're able to deal with them and everyone is able to deal with them.
Lots of questions. You can pick.
Yeah, lots of questions on questions from Sylvain in France. The poverty rate went down thanks to the economy the way it was over the past 30 years or so, a bit more because I'm using a statistic from 1980, obviously. But in the meantime, CO2 emissions in the north have started going down, not sufficiently, but they've started going down. And obviously it's the next battle, and it's a battle, by the way, that I'm fighting myself, as you heard, very well. It's my job today to decrease CO2 emissions with thanks to pump storage to store energy with water and elevation change, very naturally. Lots of people are active doing this, and that's the next battle. In fact, for this battle to work and to succeed, we need these rules. We need these rules. Otherwise, China is going to keep on manufacturing photovoltaic panels with coal-fired power plants. I mean, and nobody's going to care. So it's going to be a disaster. It's going to keep on being an environmental disaster. So we need rules like that. It's an absolute necessity to win this battle. Today, photovoltaic panels, obviously, supposedly very good for nature, are being manufactured with electricity from China coming from coal-fired power plants. Same thing with batteries. And if you don't have a carbon tax, border tax, like what Europe is doing, it's going to keep on being a disaster. Now, obviously, there are many other battles that have to be fought. You talked about lots of other issues, saying that we should sort our problems first before we sort others' problems. I mean, others' problems are our problems. I mean, today, again, we are losing control over our future. We are losing jobs massively. I mean, we have people voting for populists in a number of countries in the West because of the current situation. It's a very crucial, urgent, immediate problem. We have environmental issues in the South, and we put enormous pressure on our companies and our people in the West, in our countries, but it's a global problem. We have to correct CO2 emissions everywhere. Otherwise we're killing ourselves. We're creating a lot of constraints for ourselves without dealing with CO2 emissions in the rest of the world. It's a global battle. So it goes through those kinds of solutions. It's unavoidable. And it's urgent, it's immediate. These problems are here today. By the way, we're in the process of losing our auto industry in the West right now because we don't have those rules. I mean, look at the results of the German auto industry. It's a disaster. I mean, Mercedes, BMW, Volkswagen. Volkswagen is starting to close factories in Germany right now because of this trading system, because of this insane trading system. And nobody's really caring about it, seriously. Maybe a part of a few politicians in the US, but doing it in a crazy way, without any real vision, any real structure, any reasoning, anything like the debate we had today, and fostering more conflict than anything else, unfortunately, probably. On the question from Germany, so the question was, yes, should we have universal taxes and minimum taxes and so forth? I don't know. I believe that what I'm suggesting is obviously going to force a number of developing countries to increase their taxes at some point in time. Obviously, because if they need to fund a social system, for example, they'll need to increase taxes. I mean, if you look at where we stand today, social spending as a percentage of GDP in the US is 32%. You can go, there's a great database, OECD database, called SOX, which is evaluating social spending per country, private and public, important to look at both. The US is at 32%, France is at 32%. Very high, way too high, I think, in France. Lots of waste, same thing in the US, lots of waste as well for different reasons. Western Europe is at around 26%. China is about 10%, India is at about 2% right now. So obviously, if social standards start improving in these countries, you know, taxes will have to go up. Yes, in these countries. But there's going to be an economy which is going to, you know, support that. Should we force minimum taxes? I don't know. This is not my philosophy, but maybe yours. You know, I respect it. You know, it's a different debate. It's getting more of an ideological debate. Question from you on the question was really, if I understood correctly, was really about the impact on purchasing power, if I understood correctly. Yes, it's more expensive, clearly, to you know, protecting, respecting human being and nature costs more than not respecting it. No question about that. It doesn't cost much to put people in labor camps. A bowl of rice every day. Yeah, it's true. It doesn't cost much. No question about that. If we want to start respecting human being and nature, yes, we have to pay the price. And yes, if we Western countries want to start respecting people and nature in a number of key industries we deem strategic, yes, it's going to cost more. No question about that. But we're going to keep the jobs, the well-paid jobs, the well-paying jobs. We're going to stop having disgruntled people throughout the countryside in the UK, throughout the countryside in France, throughout the countryside in the US, in the Rust Belt, the people who voted recently again against the Democrats who supposedly were supposed to defend them because they were disgruntled, because they didn't have well-paying jobs. So we're going to stop that situation because, yes, it's going to cost a bit more, but we're going to be able to hire these people and pay them decent salaries. So the consequences will be very significant from a social and political standpoint.
Okay, I have questions there. Okay, the 3, 4 last questions. We need to end in 10 minutes.
Hi, I'm Lou from France. I thought it was interesting that we've been talking about values a lot. And I was wondering if it's actually a loss of values that we have or a fight of values. Because obviously we have an ecological transition to finance. And we've been talking about these fundamental values and social values that the West is supposed to have lost. And when we talk about ecological transition, and I know you're very interested in rare earth minerals and hydropower, and you have projects in hydropowers and all of these things that are facing resistance from indigenous communities, increasing resistance, and local communities because they see it as an extension of capitalism and green colonialism and the new ways to exploit them. And there was a phrase from a UN diplomat from the Global South that was saying, maybe this is an ecological transition for the Global North at the price, at the cost of the Global South. So I was thinking, so putting people and nature first wouldn't be about recentering our value system around the principle of, for example, indigenous peoples that have been very well preserving like nature forever, and shouldn't we be with the West realigning our value system around them rather than trying to impose them our value system that is centered around our economic system that is failing us, obviously. So that's kind of my question.
Hello, I'm Zulfia from Azerbaijan. You mentioned that about ecological problems, worker rights and other problems, and yet on the other hand you support free trade, and you suppose that if we have just free trade, which is basically the free trade standards and rules which are created by West for West and then called universal, and then if we just obey them, everyone, so like Western companies wouldn't be disadvantages in front of Chinese companies, and they could earn more, which means they could accumulate more profit, they could pollute more, they could exploitate more. So like how exactly, like just obeying these free trade rules, we can solve the problems that you mentioned?
Okay, two questions. One here, the last two questions, and then
Talal from Egypt. I just want to ask a question. Maybe let's just pinpoint the elephant in the room. And my question would be, what's the difference between China and the US or the EU when it comes with trade? Because I think we've been talking about different aspects during your presentation. Like one of them was respecting human rights or labor rights. And I'm not defending China, of course. There's all sweatshops and everything's happening there. Also, I found like the US is also running sweatshops, but in China, running sweatshops somewhere else. Like you have companies like Tesla, have companies like Amazon, all of these countries, Apple, they're all Western companies. So about values, it's a little bit, in a way, intricate. And also when it comes to unequal exchanges, we're talking about a trade system that's built on trading using one currency only. Which is the US dollar. And when any other country tries to trade with its own currency, it's frowned upon and maybe is facing a lot of tariffs. This happened with oil, happened with a lot of things recently with BRICS when they were just announcing that they might issue a separate currency, and then Trump said he's going to be levying 100% tariffs. So again, there's no leeway in it. And if we move to the third aspect of it, and it's like respecting human rights as well, and maybe depending on NGOs and self-tyrants and all of that, but if we're going to be talking about politics of it, and I'm just quoting Obama here from his memoir when he said after the Arab Spring, he's actually discovered the idea that they have to protect the US interest and they have to deal with tyrants because this is going to be protecting the US interest in the region. And that's why they started instilling a lot of governments, which are like basically phony governments, but because it gives them access to the resources and all of that. So it's not like less ethical or more ethical than China, it's just different way of playing the game. And yeah, that's why I just think, yeah, it's more of competition.
Very, very last, because we have to finish in 5 minutes. From the global south.
Hi, I'm Isabella from Brazil. And I was wondering also in the same line, like how it was okay, as we saw in a slide, like creating jobs in the garment industry, like free trade promoted that for women, but also the labor conditions for the garment industry is what allows for like lower prices, and this is not okay for the industries that are competing with global north companies. So why are we just concerned with the labor standards in these strategic industries? I don't know if I understood your point correctly.
Okay. So you have a set of questions. Yes.
Many questions. The question from Egypt first, difference between the US and China. Well, I'm sorry, China is not a democracy. I mean, there's a big difference, you know. I mean, in the US, we just saw it recently. I mean, people ousted a president they didn't like. That cannot happen in China. I mean, just not happen. Never going to happen, at least in the short term. May happen one day, hopefully, but it didn't happen. So there's a fundamental difference, you know, fundamental difference. On one hand, there is an autocracy. On the other hand, there's a democracy. Imperfect, but there is a democracy. Now, in terms of, yeah, you're saying Tesla and Amazon are running sweatshops. Possibly, it's not totally proven, but you're right that the issue I'm talking about is we have, I said earlier, we have forgotten our values by indeed enabling these free trade agreements, not enforcing these values, core values we have of respecting human beings and nature. We have indeed surrendered our values. That's the issue. That's precisely the issue. And that's what's wrong. That's what's wrong. And that's why I believe there shouldn't be any free trade agreement with China. There should never have been. And you're right. We're not ethical. But because of greed and naivety, again, as Mike Pompeo said, we have created a Frankenstein and we have allowed this to happen. On France, I don't think we have a failing system. I mean, if you look at our wealth in general and our wealth 30, 40, 50 years ago, it's far greater. If you look at, you know, you fall sick, you get treated immediately for free in a hospital. Go to India, for example, and see what's happening. If you fall sick, you're going to have to pay everything. I mean, out of your pocket. It's not going to be paid by the government. So I'm not going to talk about a failing system when it's enabling that. It's not a failing system. It's a system which is respecting you a lot as a human being. And if you want to stop doing that, you have to come up with a model that works and where the numbers add up to be able to fund that and to pay for that. And at this point in time, so far, nobody has ever been able to come up with something that works better than that. It's imperfect. It's far from being perfect. But so far, so good. It works. And it's protecting you a lot. And it has a great cost. So before you find something that works better, and you can come up with suggestions. I'm very open to that. But that's what you're going to have to suggest. You know, how do we pay for that? You know, in terms of your question, yeah, this is not a perfect solution. It means that in a number of industries, you know, people are still going to be exploited. But we're not going to change all that overnight, you know. But in the garment industry, I tell you, if we start enabling free unions, for example, it's going to make a big change. If we're going to start protecting union leaders, in my book, I'm alluding to a situation in Cambodia recently, where you had 1,300 employees in the garment industry, and they were unhappy because the management was not taking into account for how long people had been working in the company, you know, which is a basic principle, basic social principle. You've been there for like 10 years, you get paid a bit more than people who've been there for like just 1 year. And so people went on strike. Management of the company fired all 1,300 employees. And they rehired everybody except the union leaders, except the 130 union leaders. I mean, if we have those rules whereby union leaders are protected, whereby free unions are allowed, it's not going to happen. We're going to stop seeing that in Cambodia. It's going to be a big change. Union leaders will be protected when they go on strike and when they ask for things which are legitimate like that. So it's not going to change the world overnight, but I tell you, it's going to allow countries to make a lot of progress and people to have a much better life. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.